So thank you both for honoring the festival with your presence. Weiwei, thank you for this powerful and deeply empathetic movie. We agreed to go by first names during this discussion. And then we're going to take your questions as well. We have about 55 minutes time, so we're going to use the movie more as a jump-off point and try to expand on several themes about it. But first, Filippo, you're one of the characters in the movie, but this is the first time you see it. So what is your first reaction? Yeah, it's on.
What can I say? It's very difficult to say anything. It's all words, and I think what Ai Weiwei did is so amazing. But I was thinking, as I was watching this movie, two things. One is, I'm exhausted. I don't know about you. I'm exhausted by feeling the pain, the fatigue of this human flow, of fleeing for life. I have done this work for so many years, but seeing this in all its aspects is really powerful in that sense. This is an exhausting thing to flee and to try to overcome all the obstacles, the sea, the mud, the policemen, the borders. And you feel it. But then there is another powerful feeling, which is this extraordinary feeling of dignity that comes from the faces of the people that you talk to. This is what redeems everything else. This is what makes you think that in the end we will prevail. And there is a beautiful quote by Princess Dina, I think, of Jordan, when she says, we are trying to remain humane, because if we don't have humanity, we will not be healthy. Our societies will die. This is such an important quote, because it is all about giving people dignity, right? As the movie says over and over again. And it is that effort that redeems everything else, redeems what our politicians are telling us day and night, that we must not be humane. So I thought that I found distress in the images, but I found encouragement and, yes, hope in the dignity that you managed to convey that well. Thank you very much for what you have done.
Thank you. Yes. Weiwei, clearly you set out to show the crisis in its global dimension. What compelled you to do this movie in the first place? What was the starting point of this film? It was not planned as a film, I understand. There was a first moment and then it grew.
Later I realized to make a film like this, you need some preparation. But my preparation started very early. It was the year I was born. My father was exiled. So I spent 20 years with him in very remote camp from Beijing, from my home, which is thousands miles away to the farthest possible border, which is Xinjiang province near Russian and on the northwest. So I spent 20 years with him there. He was forbidden to write. He was a poet, studied in Paris, and early time joined the revolution, but was criticized as a rightist. So maybe that gave me an excuse to make a film like this, because I always in China defending freedom of speech, basic human rights, judicial justice. Then suddenly, after years of detention, I got my passport. But before I got my passport, we started film, even I was in detention. In this film, you see on the beginning, there's a few standing figures, one after another for maybe 15 seconds. Then that is from Iraq refugee camp. That time I sent 2 assistants since I cannot travel to the refugee camps and to study. The curiosity is very, very simple. Who is refugee? Why they been called refugee? And how they look like? And what's in their mind? You know, as an artist, I have to get the image, get all those videos, so I can fill up my curiosity. Why I need to do it? Because as a human being, or I have to understand my relationship with the world. If I don't understand others, how can I know who I am? You know, this is a very simple question. So once I get my passport, I started this. I went to Lesbos with my son and my girlfriend. The purpose is I want to see how they approach Europe and how they. What it means they come to the shore at the border. Then when you see the real refugee on the boat, the moment I was totally shocking. I see how the people gave up everything, bring their children, the pregnant lady and the old people, come down this very poor equipped boat through the night, trying to approach Europe. Once they arrived, nobody take care of them. European basically betrayed its own value and trying to even force the Greece to push them away. The Greece simply said, we cannot push them into the ocean. You know, this is impossible. You know, they all had a migration history. They all understand what's it like if life in danger, if you come from this kind of war or this kind of persecution. They have to find a place just for their children or for their future. You know, I don't see they would have future in many of them. So that moment I decided to make this film because it's not really prepared for a film, but for my own documentation, to leave some historical record for what our time is about.
So you went to Lesbos for another project, you looked at this, the movie came out of that. You just said, as an artist, I did this. And most people who do films about refugees actually take the approach of the documentary filmmaker. You took the approach of the artist. And there are actually images that are pretty aesthetic in this movie in many cases. So how do you see the role of the artist in this crisis?
I think as artist, I see the refugee as a human condition. It's as a human development, we always have the situation like this. We cannot say this is a incident. It's not incident. How human develop, how our civilization formed only because, you know, we all sometimes somewhere has been refugees in our previous generation. And I have to give dignity of this struggle. The freedom is from this kind of struggle. Today we have this prosperity, we have mixed races or ideas, challenge and trying to find the balance. But that all come from we are different. We have to accept the different and to be tolerant and to be, to give the dignity of even those suffer. That's why people said, why you make it so beautiful? I said, there's a beauty in the all level of life. It's not, it's not only beauty in privileged life. It is maybe even more beauty in those people who are seeking for freedom and who have a very strong mind and heart, has courage, and bring their children to overcome this immense problem. I can never even imagine they can make it here. But today, during the film shooting, there's 3-4 person I met in the camp in Domini. It's right here. They come to see me because they.
Yes, you can stand up and
she is actually in the film. She's actually in the film. She's from Iran, and she was like in tears every day to ask me to help. How can I help? I cannot know any smugglers. I can't help. I'm a documentary filmmaker. And I try not to even to intervene with their normal situation, which is not normal at all. You think this is a crime to them. But as documentary maker, you always have to keep your distance to what you're filming. So even I cannot do it. It just put me in such a tragic moral judgment I have to do. And I was so surprised, and I never know they can make it, but now they're in Switzerland, I'm so happy. They're waiting outside. They don't know if this film is here. And she is in there. She's a lady sitting there, say, is any leader can spend one night here? You remember on the mini truck? That's her. Thank you. I think if she can make it here, if Swiss can accept these 4 families with his son and his brother and husband, I think there's hope. I think there's humanity somewhere, and we have to keep that alive. This is the only way we can survive, is keep the humanity. And this is something we only can counter. After all, we are all humans. So.
Filippo, there are 2 figures in this movie that I think are really shocking. One is 65 million displaced people. The other is 26 years average stay in a refugee camp. How do we let things go so far? How did we get here?
Yeah, that's the most important question. Of course, the fundamental issue talking about refugees, and this movie brings that to us very vividly through these beautiful images, is that I said it many times, but let me say it once again. We have become unable to solve war, to end war. I always repeat that if you look at 2017, look at the whole of the year, so many conflicts, so many wars, many of which are depicted in this movie. The only one that was solved was a conflict in Gambia. That was the one war that was solved in 2017, no other one. Look at Syria today, look, Security Council resolution that is completely ignored by the parties to the conflict and by their backers, some of whom are sitting in the Security Council. So, frankly speaking, that's the failure that lies behind both the 65 million refugees and displaced, and the 26 or more years that in average people have to spend in exile. Some, like the Palestinian, as we have seen in the images, is more than 70 years. So really this puts to us is such a fundamental question. How can we restore a sense of international cooperation? Yes, to help refugees, but also to come together and address war. That's the key issue here. And of course, it becomes much more complicated, and the movie also talks about this in the Kenya chapter, because in addition to war, you have other factors that push people to move: climate change, poverty, and often one determines the other, and often they're mixed, and this also makes the whole management of the human flow so much more complicated. So it's complex. There is no one answer, but at least restore the sense that prevailed after the Second World War briefly, maybe prevailed at some point after the fall of the Berlin Wall as well, that we can come together and address conflict. If we don't that, if we cannot restore peace where there is war, this will continue, and may I say, and I'm not terribly optimistic there, unfortunately, I think it may become worse.
Well, wait, we have just seen you take out your phone twice and take some pictures and take some video. You're clearly filming and photographing all the time, and for this movie you shot 1,000 hours of footage, and then you turn it into a 2 hours, 15 minutes movie. So what was your thinking when you were selecting what to keep in the film?
As I said before, we keep a record of archiving and research. That's a preparement for the film. But of course, the usage of it is very short. It's 2 hours, some minutes already make people suffer so much because you feel this is like endless problem. But what we have present is really a very, actually very superficial, very small fragment of what those refugees really means. They spend the generations as refugees, and day and night, every second has to count. And when they arrive, they will spend months in the tents, no shower, no place to even have a warm drink or soup, or they cannot have dry a pair of socks or have some light in their tents. It's so impossible, the life. But you always think, as a human being, we really can survive, which, yes, you see people survive those situations. So as we all know, all those people, none of them willingly to leave their home. They may be poor or may be uneducated, but none of them willingly to leave their home, to leave everything behind, their language, their religion, their little peace, and their neighborhood. But when all of them is gone and their life is in danger, what do you expect? I mean, anybody have any suggestions? They don't leave their home, then they will die. So this is just so simple. Those people has courage, and they try to make it, especially for their children. And that is not, if that doesn't really make any sense, what else in our life can make any sense to us? So our rationality, our own knowledge, and our culture has to be confronted and tested by our understanding about other people's pain and how suffering or human beings as one together. Still, we're in very bad shape. All those wars are caused by nations which not necessarily even would meet one refugee. They are so much profited by globalization, which explores a lot of nations and makes them unstable and make the poor extremely poor, make the environment completely being destroyed. And what do we expect if we don't stop those wars? All those nations selling weapons, the major nations selling 80% of the weapons to the areas which is not stable, or even initiate wars or behind those wars. Those people don't take it responsible, but those people are leaders of our nations. So what do you expect? And how can we solve those problems? I think this is a really question, about our contemporary life. Can we still stay privileged as always and elite as we want to be, but at the same time failed to bear very essential moral and responsibility?
You're being. I want to build on something you just said, because there is something that strikes me. You said we wanted to document the situation. We want to create a sort of historical memory of a very particular moment in time. At the same time, we see you in the movie very often yourself, which seems to me a sort of invitation or reminder of the necessity to witness these things. Turning away may be yet another layer of the crisis, so we need to engage and witness in the problem. Is that what you try to convey by putting yourself in the movie?
Put myself in the movie is later decision of the editor, because I never prepared. You can see many footages of myself. There is rough shooting by iPhones by my colleagues, but I agree with putting myself in there because it's honest. It's a one person's effort to make this movie. It's not historic channel. It's not, it's just this artist want to make this movie. And it can be ridiculous, can be a very unbalanced view, but that's the truth. And what's more important is I really think personal engagement is the way to solve the problem, because we often give those rights too easily to politicians, easily to say, okay, I cannot do anything, this is too big. It's not too big, we all can do something. If you really want to do something, yeah, just like me being silly and to make very little, I make this movie, it's not so difficult to make a movie like that for artists like me. But how many people want to take action? When people think it's too complicated, it's just an excuse. If your son go to school, not come back, then you will not say it's too complicated to find him. If your mom cannot find a hospital, the doctor will not come, you will not say it's too complicated. Come on, this is necessity to do it, just do it.
Yeah, but I want to Filippo, I want to pick up on that because there is a scene in the movie that's interesting. Weiwei is kind of jokingly trying to exchange a passport with a refugee and then to exchange a tent against his studio in Berlin. And of course, it doesn't happen. It's just a metaphor. But it seems to me to be a metaphor of the limits of the individual capacity to intervene as one person and do something and make something happen.
Yes, maybe. I think that's actually a very central moment of the movie, for sure. You can, I won't have the pretense to interpret it next to the author, but certainly it is one way to look at it is how the identities that are given to us bind us and limit us. They cannot really be exchanged in the end. However, without that limit, without that binding identity, we're nobody. I detected, but maybe I read too much into the scene, that on the part of the refugee there was a certain anxiety to see his passport go. But this is an anxiety that those of us who work in this area have seen so often, the anxiety of not having a document. Because many escape from war with nothing. So this man, in a way, in his tremendous tragedy, was lucky that at least in his plastic bag he had the documents. So it made me think really about how confining, but also what freedom the documents give. Without that, you cannot do anything. So I also found that scene particularly important. But I'm sure you can read it in many other ways.
I think you're the best audience I ever could have, and I honestly respect and I respect your organization the most. You can see how inferior you have been appeared in the film in every location. UNHCR has been clearly most rational and intelligent and most devoting. People in every corner of the world, unthinkable corners. If there's tragedy, there's UNHCR people. They always open to any kind of discussion. And I couldn't imagine, in this world, how fortunate we still have this situation like this, but also how unfortunate we still need people like this. In defending our human dignity, people may never even recognize the kind of effort they are making, and so how difficult that could be. People will stay in post for years or decades. They don't know where the next one will be. They will be shifting, and they will always living with problems, other people's problem, but they always become their problem, a lifetime problem. They would have a trauma if they don't do this kind of work. So talk about the passport. Yes, normally we think, oh, that's, our identity, only because we are guaranteed protected by those so-called identities. But you can easily see those people are abandoned by authorities, but they still have this last straw they can hold. They hide this passport within their plastic bag, even before they throw out anything, they would still hold it. And my passport is even more ironic. It just returned to me months ago, and I cannot use that to go back to my home because I may easily fall into this prosecution. It doesn't protect me at all. So it's both ironic condition. Thank you.
I have plenty of other questions, but I'm going to just ask one more, and then we take questions from the room. And it is about, what do you expect, Weiwei, about the potential impact of the film? I mean, it's a very demanding film. It lays out an incredibly long set of facts and emotions and images. What do you expect the impact of the film to be? Yes.
I think for this film, in my life, I would say I never experienced a similar experience in all my art practice together. And I've been through very difficult art practice, some in dealing with social injustice, such as the Sichuan earthquake, which wiped out 70,000 lives, and among them, we have to find these 5,000 students who disappeared in the earthquake. So we've managed to find those 5,000 students' name, birthday, and all those schools how they disappeared. But that gave me such a political problem. I become an activist, actually, only because those reasons. Make film like this put me on very different platform. So far, I have made 350 interviews about this film on all major newspapers and the media, which I believe is a very strong platform in every nation, Europe or elsewhere. I just come back from Australia, Sydney, and Melbourne, just promoting the film. You have an audience like 800 or even more audience. The tickets always sell in seconds. You have people packed, waiting online, and willing to discuss, listen to more about it. But I still doubt about it because all audience I reach, even in London, 120 theaters showing it at same night, also with satellites presentation of our conversation. The total audience is so small. It's smaller than any of my art exhibition. Just one single art exhibition would have more audience. So I'm afraid about the people cares about it. They always care. The people doesn't care. They will not come to theater to see the film. But next month I will have a university viewing the film in the United States. Hundreds of universities will see it at the same time. So I think it will have a profound, long time lasting, almost like educational film. But I think it will reach quite a lot of audience.
Let's see if there are questions from the room. Raise your hand. We're going to bring a microphone. There is one here, just in the third or fourth row. Can I just see the microphone somewhere? It's coming. Yes. Please.
Thank you very much. It was a very, very moving film. I'm Greek myself, and I don't live, but I'm near one of those islands, so I see the reality quite closely. You said something that I think really resonated in terms of the decisions that are being made around the decision by Europe to get the refugees to go back to Turkey in return for visas. And those kind of political decisions have also had a great impact, particularly on the islands in Greece, where originally the UNHCR was there, but now UN organizations are not present, and the situation is getting worse daily. because the theory is, oh, well, they're not going to stay. Well, where are they going? They're not going anywhere. We're 3 years, 4 years now, and it just gets worse and worse. And my question is, in the large organizations, we shouldn't be so motivated by politics. We should be outside of the political situation. And I feel that this is these people on these islands are really suffering because of the political decisions.
Hi there, Filippo.
I can maybe answer. I would certainly agree with you that the decision, the agreement with Turkey, whichever way it was then implemented, which is, in fact, very few people were sent back. That's the reality. But that's not what matters. It created a huge precedent that spells doom for the principle of asylum in Europe. That's the one key issue. And then, of course, it had a very negative impact, as the movie says very clearly, on Greece, that became the place where people got stuck. Now, in fact, we are present on the islands. We were only briefly away when we disagreed with the refugee sites being treated as detention centers, but when that relented, we agreed to go back and help. I don't know if that's an encouraging answer, because in spite of us being there actually and working there, the impact has been relatively small. We have managed to convince the authorities to move a certain number of people to the mainland, but fewer than those that are on the island. But I wanted to say something. You said we should not be involved in politics. I actually see, maybe I'm very grateful to what Weiwei said earlier about the presence of my organization. But the one of the real roles that we have as the UN or one of the organizations of the UN dealing with this matter is to be a bridge between the realities on the ground and the politics that determine those realities. So our role is to be the go-between, is to be there with the people, help them, witness, talk about this, intervene as much as we can, because we're not the ones making decisions, and then go and talk to those making decisions in the political sphere and try to convince them to do the right thing. So we're not doing politics, but we are dealing with the politics. That's really, and often this is not clearly understood. And this is what, by the way, we're doing in Greece, against a lot of odds, because you understand it's not only, or maybe not even so much, the Greek authorities, but it is the whole of Europe that is terrified that these people be brought closer to the borders where they can become a problem again. So it's a very, very big political issue to which we have to talk.
Anyone else? Yes, just there. And anyone else for later? One here. Please.
Thank you very much for this extraordinary contribution. I have two questions. One is, you mentioned there is a surprisingly little audience. And with regard to that, how do you see this important film is changing discourse during the viewings and after these debates? And secondly, how do you see this could be amplified, so we would bring the film out of the traditional venues like film festivals? You mentioned university, but obviously there are many, many other platforms, including the UN, many others that could be amplified. And maybe just the third one from Mr. Filippo Grandi. What are your thoughts on fundamentally changing the role of the UN, including your agency that is doing fantastic work, to really push the boundaries? Thank you.
Maybe Weiwei first on how to make this.
I think is how to make it work, and which has a more profound meanings with social change, or to make it happen. I think it takes consciousness first. We have to be aware what is happening. You know, we, as modern society, we believe the right information and communication has to be said before any kind of action taking, because to be informed is so important, because we have to have our emotions and then our rationalities become a true knowledge rather than just a textbook or some kind of strange conclusion without our own judgment. So I'm so depending on each of you or people who view the film to be creative and to think this is also can be done, and can just this is the only initiative. It would be we start to help another person, or to care about another person, or to tell another person to say, here's a film maybe you should watch. Those things I think will make a big difference. And I couldn't see the other possibility.
Filippo on HCR.
Yeah, I think one has to also always think about the term United Nations is a very complicated issue. The United Nations is an organization which has different parts. One is ours, we deal with refugees, then others deal with health, with children, and they function, sometimes we are doing well, sometimes we're doing less well. That's really, we're accountable for that, we try to do our best. But then you have the United Nations, and fundamentally as a political organization of states. This is what the UN is. This is the Security Council. This is the General Assembly. This is what drives the United Nations. So it's not, what drives it is not the organization itself, is the states that make that organization. And this is where, when there is lack of unity, of cooperation, this is where the weakness lies. In resolving conflicts that cause refugees, in addressing together climate change that cause so much distress, and the list is very long. So you have to look at it in this way. I would say that the organizational part, the parts of the UN, the operational parts like us, we will continue to do our best to push the boundaries in our area. But then we also have the role to convince the states to do that, to give us the money, to make political decisions. This is the really challenging one. This is what I was telling later. This is where we have a role to dialogue with states to convince them to do the right things. And unfortunately, I must say that in the last few years, we have seen less of that unity of intent, even around what you would think brings everybody together, which is the humanitarian issues. Anybody who watches this movie cannot then go back, if he or she is a politician and they made a bad decision in that respect. How can they? We cannot even imagine, and yet it's happening. It's happening. But then this is why I think, going more to the other question, that this movie has an important message to pass, which is really about, these bad decisions or lack of decision or lack of action has an impact on people like you and me. This is what the movie says. I think, sorry to extend for 2 more seconds, but I personally thought that the most moving scene, one that I could hardly watch, so moving it was, is when there is a woman filmed from behind that becomes sick by her own distress. It is a scene of great despair, because she's asking, what am I to do now? I think it is also a scene of profound dignity, and I think the fact that you give her something to wipe her face summarizes everything that humanitarian action is. But it is also a scene that carries a message. This is what bad decisions or bad action do to people, to ordinary people. I think that's, if you manage to bring this message globally, I think you will have done an even greater service to humanity.
There was a question right here.
Thank you for this powerful, moving film. So recognizing that we're in a very complex system, in a landscape where there are very different I guess, people beholden to different stakeholders and policymakers and geopolitics and funders and donor agencies. So what advice would you pass on to those involved, the next generation in the international organizations? What would you suggest that their role be? Do you think that we do have an effective role in mediating and bridging this, recognizing that there are member states within the UNSC who are complicit and exacerbating the situation and seems unwilling to be helpful? And then a second question, do you think that there's a moral responsibility for the rest of the world to help this? Thank you.
Maybe.
Well, I think very often we talk about issues, we only, let's say we talk of women's rights, or we talk about gays' rights, or we talk about some religions' rights, but we forget everything, refugees' problem. We very often just focus on the individual cases, forget everything's connected. That's why we have to talk about humanity, very basic human rights. And we have to understand we all created as one, as equal. That's only possible religion we would have is to protect our human interests. And so that gave no politician any excuse to have any policy which against those values. I think we have to keep talking about that until those things being solved. If we give up those rights, and it will be tragic, not necessarily tragic of ourselves, but it will come to us because our rights being affected by those bad decisions. I think without this kind of total understanding, we can never solve the problem. The problem always, I think the one tactic is all those borders or nationalism or this kind of, is try to divide us from the real issue. So I think keep talking about humanity is the only possibility. Otherwise, we can never solve the problem.
And I would say two things. One, echoing also what Weiwei said. I think it's very, this is a global, it's a movie about a global phenomenon. That's very clear, from Kenya to Mexico to Rohingya. But it focuses quite a lot on Europe. And I think it's good that it does that. In my little 2 seconds in the movie, I remind the audiences that this is the continent where human rights as a concept somehow, as a codified concept were born, and where certainly the Refugee Convention, actually this is the city where it was born. I think it is important to continue to set the bar high on human rights in Europe. Since we are at a human rights festival at the closing of it, I think it's appropriate to remind ourselves in this movie, without ever mentioning it somehow or very much in passing, clearly states that message. Because if Europe backtracks on rights, then the world will follow very quickly. And I see it myself, how many countries I visit which host many more refugees than in Europe, many more. And the governments tell me, why you keep asking us to take more, and we see rich countries pushing them back. So it's a very bad example. But on your other point, what can we do? I often think of what politicians say, not all, but many, how they politicize this issue. And the politicization of the issue of refugees and migrants goes through an artificial fueling of fears. And it's always around 2 or 3 issues. They will threaten your security, they will destroy your values, they will take your jobs. It's always these things, right? Security, values, and jobs. Actually, if you watch this movie, you understand that these people are not coming to threaten any of these things. They are actually escaping from insecurity or sometimes poverty. It's quite the reverse. And I think we need to explain better the story. because unfortunately nowadays anybody who explains the story in that manner gains votes and gets elected, which is what they want. So we need to tell the story in a different way. This is one way that this movie does, and this is a way that all of us that work in international relations, we must take very seriously the fears, the apprehensions of people. We should not dismiss them. Many people are afraid, also in Europe, about security because of terrorism and otherwise. They are afraid of losing jobs, in the last few years in particular. They see their values weakened. So it's, instead of pointing the fingers at the few miserable people who are trying to help, to get help, I think that we need to address those fears in the right manner. So our message is to say the threat doesn't come from here, comes from elsewhere. It is serious, we must handle it, but please don't take it out on people that simply need protection and need their lives to be saved.
Anyone else? Yes, here in the middle. Raise your hand so she can see you.
So this question is for Weiwei. I'd be really curious to see what your perspective is on where you position yourself as an artist throughout making the movie, because I think increasingly anthropologists and sociologists and social scientists are faced with the challenge of where do I position myself as sort of the leader of this project or sort of as a researcher. How do I engage with the communities and the people that I'm involved with in sort of a reflexive way, or sort of how do I develop myself throughout the project. And I think particularly there was an image that I really enjoyed seeing you dancing. I think it was in the Gaza Strip. You see this giant crowd of people and all of a sudden there's a Chinese man just jumping and laughing. And I thought that was really great to see that immersion. But I'd be really curious to see if you could elaborate a little more on how you develop yourself as a person and as an artist throughout the entire project.
Well, I never really consciously about my position as an artist. I think I try to free myself from being an artist, and I sometimes I feel joy, I would celebrate, and I feel pain, I would go deeper, even darker, to see what is really makes that I feel that can, you know, I just like anybody else, but I'm probably not. Doesn't have so much education or training to be just certain way. I think a man should live or a woman should live freely. You have one life to celebrate, and you have to make your decisions about simply, directly about right or wrong, and trying to maybe you can help. So that's how I do. I don't have clearly like a high target or life purpose of serving something, but if you come to the minimum, you still think human rights is the issue. If only by clearly recognize that and protect that, could benefit anybody, because if it benefits you, it benefits anybody. So.
Anyone else? Yes, here in the front.
Oui, bonjour. Nous sommes dans le festival depuis quelques jours et on s'intéresse tous aux droits humains. Vous faites un travail avec ce film exigeant artistiquement et je me posais la question, puisque vous en avez parlé, par rapport à sa forme et à sa longueur, donc si c'est pas un peu excluant pour une certaine forme de public et que de ce fait, comment on touche un plus grand nombre?
Could you understand the question? No. The question is whether there is maybe an issue in terms of getting the film to be seen and circulate because it's long, and it's long. It's more than 2 hours, and we live in an era of declining attention spans, and therefore there may be a limit to reach broader audiences. Do you think that that's a risk? That was the question. The question of the lady was, do you think there is a risk that the circulation of the film gets limited because the film is long, over 2 hours, and we live in an era of short attention spans?
For me, the film is too short, and
okay, we will take that. Weiwei, tell me a couple of other things. One is your artistic practice is pretty broad. You do right now. You must have probably a couple dozen exhibitions around the world going. Working on this movie also was a starting point for a series of other artistic projects. The installations in Berlin and Copenhagen with the live vests, or the exhibit in New York, Good Fences Make Good Neighbors. How did you go from one to the other? What kind of artistic thinking came out of the movie, of the making of the movie?
I don't have weekends. I don't enjoy holidays. I wake up at midnight. I would think about those things, and I still can do much more than this. I just I'm too old, a little bit 62 years old, and I hope I suggest some young people can do better than me, and I would enjoy to see that.
Let's see if there is one last question from the audience. Yeah. Yes.
Tashidelek Ai Weiwei, ni hao. I would like to congratulate you for this very nice, very nice movie about human flow, about refugees. And since we know that it's most of the causes of refugee comes from the state for political reasons. And in China, they are like, you had problem, you were in prison, and you had problem in getting your passport. And then they are now still like Tibetan dissidents, like Tsering Hüsela, she's in hostage. Your friend Tsering Hüsela in Beijing, she's in hostage. And there's Xinjiang Uyghur scholar Ilham Tohti, he's still in prison. So I would like to ask if you're planning any artistic movies or any projects that you would like to do about human rights situation in China in the coming months, and how do you feel about your security now that you are in exile and with your family, and how are you as a person? Thank you.
As you said, I have many colleagues, friends. They are in jail. Unfortunately, they're lawyers and human rights defenders, and many of them been sentenced lifetime or 10 years in jail for absolutely no reason, only because their conscience, the prisoner of conscience. And this is an unthinkable situation. Two of my lawyers are sentenced. Should I feel danger about the society? If I don't draw that conclusion, my judgment must be wrong. But I don't feel that dangerous. If it's not my mom to keep saying, "Don't come back to see me," so I kind of listen and obey to my mom. He's 86. He never had any kind of problem with, the authorities, because my father later become very high position in the literature circle, and he's first generation of the revolutionary. And if she at 86 would tell his son to say, "Don't ever come back," I have to think about it. It's not easy when you think that's a place you just have to say bye. And to make a movie, yes, I did make over 10 movies about Chinese situation, and maybe millions of people watched on the internet, but I don't think that helps that much. That's why I'm kind of not to say give up. I think I'm quite a failure in terms of China. I did one individual could ever possibly did in terms of to fight or to give out a clear opinion about all the policies. But I don't think I made any change. It's not very possible to make some kind of real change in China. It's a state has been in same kind of condition for thousands of years. So that's my answer.
Well, wait, let me end with one question about you and the artistic process, because I read a quote from you from an interview that said, as an artist, the situation I'm confronted to changes me. How did make this movie change you?
I think we need, as artists or as individual, we need a clear measurement about who we are at the beginning. The very classic question: do we know who we are, or we only know it by we recognize our relations towards other people? And I think my answer is very clear. Most of us, we don't know who we are until we find out. And that takes a lifetime to find out who we are. And we always, next day, we always can become another person. So I'm quite it's not just being liberal, but it's a truth. Life has no clear purpose or clear form, except we give them. We gave them by through our happiness or angriness or fight. As artists, you find a form, and that form carries and be part of you. So I think the impact for me is still to discover and to feel I'm still alive.
Ai Weiwei, Filippo Grandi, thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.